We're diving deep today, folks, into a real tragedy. A tragedy that's left a lot of folks scratching their heads searching for answers.
Yeah, a tough one for sure.
It was a seemingly normal day in D.C. when an American Airlines jet collided with a military helicopter right there in the air.
Just devastated.
Absolutely. 67 lives lost. It's a lot to unpack, and we're going to try to do that today.
As best we can.
We're going to look at what happened, yeah, of course. But more importantly, we're going to try to figure out why this happened, what led to this devastating event.
Right, because it's one thing to report the news, but it's a whole other thing to really understand it.
Exactly. We're going beyond just the headlines here. We've got news reports, expert analyses, eyewitness accounts, all painting a pretty grim picture.
Yeah, the sources really bring this one to life and not in a good way.
Right, and they point to some major issues, challenges with visibility, miscommunication between military and civilian aircraft, limitations in our safety systems, the whole 9 yards.
It's a web for sure, and we're going to try to untangle it.
All right. Okay, so let's start with that initial moment, the point of impact, rewind the tape. What can you tell us about the conditions surrounding this collision? What made this airspace so challenging?
Well, imagine this. You're a pilot trying to land a plane at night in a city like DC. I mean, it's bustling, right?
Oh, yeah. Tons of lights everywhere.
You've got runway lights, city lights, other aircraft, all creating this visual chaos.
Yeah, so you're saying it's kind of like sensory overload up there.
Exactly. And in that kind of environment, trying to spot a helicopter can be incredibly difficult, especially if it's not emitting a strong transponder signal,
I see. So it's almost like trying to find a needle in a haystack up there.
It kind of is.
And it gets worse because our sources also point to this communication gap, this disconnect between military and civilian aircraft. It's almost like they're speaking different languages while they're up there in the air.
That's a really good way to put it.
So why is that? Why is this communication so fragmented? Why haven't we adopted like a more unified system already?
That's the million-dollar question. It's something that has frustrated aviation experts for years, literally decades.
Okay, so spill the tea. What's the deal?
Well, it goes all the way back to the Cold War era when military operations needed to be hush-hush, top secret, and that led to them developing their own separate communication frequencies.
Right, like their own coded language.
Exactly, and trying to integrate those systems with the civilian ones, well, it's proven to be a nightmare, not just on the technical side, but also politically.
Right, I can imagine there's probably a lot of red tape and bureaucracy holding things back.
Exactly, it's a tough nut to crack.
It's just wild to think that in this day and age, with all our technology, we still haven't figured out how to get everyone on the same page up there in the sky.
It's a work in progress for sure.
Okay, so let's talk about TCAS,
Mm-hmm.
the Traffic Collision Avoidance System. It's supposed to prevent these kinds of collisions, right?
In theory, yes, it's a fantastic system.
But it seems like it has some limitations, especially during those critical phases like landing.
You're absolutely right.
So what's the deal with those limitations and what kind of implications do they have?
So TCAS, it relies on transponder signals to detect and track aircraft, and then it issues alerts to pilots if there's a potential conflict, like a collision course.
Okay, so it's like a warning system.
Exactly. It gives pilots time to maneuver and avoid a disaster.
That's amazing. But you said it has limitations.
Yeah, so the thing is, below 1,000 feet during landing, TCAS is actually deactivated.
Wait, why?
Well, engineers were worried about false alerts. Imagine a plane is just feet away from the runway and TCAS suddenly screams, "Climb, climb."
Oh my God, that would be terrifying.
Right. It could lead to an even more dangerous situation than if they just landed normally.
So they decided to just switch it off during landing.
Yeah, essentially they had to weigh the risks, false alerts versus potential collisions, and they decided it was safer to deactivate it during those final moments of landing.
So it's like this double-edged sword. It's great for high altitude, but leaves a gap in protection when they need it most.
Exactly, and that's why this incident is so troubling. It highlights the limitations of even our best technology.
And it really brings to light the complexities of aviation safety. It's not just about having the technology, it's about implementing it correctly and balancing safety with preventing system-induced errors.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a delicate balance.
Okay, so our sources also dig into the role of air traffic control and standard flight patterns, those predetermined routes that aircraft are supposed to follow. Could these patterns actually be contributing to these incidents?
That's a really interesting question, and honestly, it's a bit controversial. Some experts argue that these standardized flight paths actually make things safer.
Okay, how so?
Well, think of it like highways. Cars are traveling at different speeds,
Yeah.
but they stay in their lanes, follow the traffic signals, and that generally prevents accidents, right?
Right, it brings order to the chaos.
Exactly. And in the same way, standard flight paths help manage the flow of traffic in the sky, reduce the workload on air traffic controllers, and ideally minimize the risk of collisions.
Okay, so they bring some method to the madness.
They do, but the problem is the airspace is not a perfect highway. There are so many variables, weather conditions, unexpected delays, pilot errors.
Right, so even with these flight paths, things can still go wrong.
Exactly, and that's what happened in this case. Despite having these standard flight patterns, the collisions still occurred, which suggests that maybe they're not as effective as we thought, or maybe there's a flaw in how they're implemented.
It's a lot to think about, and it seems like this incident is really raising some important questions about how we manage our airspace and whether these standard flight paths are actually doing enough to prevent collisions.
It's definitely a conversation we need to have.
Absolutely. All right, so the last thing I want to touch on is something that sounds almost futuristic, but it's incredibly relevant to this discussion, and that's data sharing between military and civilian aircraft.
That's the holy grail right there.
So tell me more about this. Like, what would that look like, and how could it potentially prevent these kinds of tragedies?
So imagine this all-aircraft, military and civilian, are equipped with technology that allows them to share real-time flight data, their speed, altitude, trajectory, you name it.
Wow, so everyone knows where everyone else is at all times.
Precisely, and that shared information would create what we call a common operating picture. It would be like having this giant digital map that shows the location and movement of every aircraft in the sky.
That's insane.
It would be a game changer for both pilots and air traffic controllers. They'd be able to anticipate potential conflicts much earlier, make more informed decisions, and take proactive measures to prevent collisions.
Wow, so it's like having a sixth sense up there.
In a way, yeah, it would significantly enhance situational awareness for everyone involved.
It's just mind-blowing to think that this technology exists, but we're not fully utilizing it.
Well, it's not quite as simple as just flipping a switch. There are a lot of technical and political hurdles to overcome: data security, privacy concerns, interoperability issues. It's a complex undertaking.
Right, but the potential benefits are huge. I mean, just think about the lives that could have been saved if that information had been readily available in this particular incident.
It's a sobering thought.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that this tragedy was not caused by just one single factor. It was a web of interconnected issues: visibility communication gaps, system limitations, and the ongoing challenges of managing an increasingly crowded airspace.
It's a perfect storm of sorts.
This incident really underscores the fragility of aviation safety and the need for continuous improvement, innovation, and collaboration to prevent future tragedies.
We can't afford to be complacent.
Absolutely. So as you reflect on everything we've discussed today, I want you to consider this. What changes do you think need to be made to create a safer airspace for everyone? Are there technological advancements we need to prioritize, regulatory overhauls we need to push for?
It's a question we all need to grapple with.
Because ultimately the responsibility for ensuring aviation safety lies with all of us.
Exactly. We need to keep pushing for progress, keep demanding better, keep asking those tough questions.
That's how we learn from tragedies like this and prevent them from happening again.